Regional conflicts, 1945 to present. Our learning objective: analyze regional conflicts around the world since 1945. We start here with Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, Sinhalese Buddhists are the majority, and they attempted to make Sinhalese the official language. They ended the official use of the Tamil language, and they also created government support for the Buddhist religion. Hindu Tamils were excluded from power. This led to a bloody civil war. The Tamil rebels agreed to a ceasefire in 2002 only when the government agreed to negotiate a separate Tamil regional government. Renewed fighting started in 2005, but the Sri Lanka military defeated the rebels in 2009. Avoiding war in Canada. Two Canadas. Canada has an English-speaking majority, but the French-speaking people in the province of Quebec felt that the government treated them unfairly. Some pushed for independence, while others used democratic means to win support for French language and culture in Quebec. In 1995, Quebec's people voted to remain in Canada. Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's troubles. After Ireland gained independence, its independence, in 1922, 6 northern counties with a Protestant majority voted to remain part of Britain. As Northern Ireland, minority Catholics faced economic and political discrimination. Many Catholics demanded civil rights and unification with the rest of Ireland, which had a Catholic majority. Beginning in the 1960s, extremists on both sides turned to violence and terrorism. The Irish Republican Army, or IRA, attacked Protestants, and Protestant militias targeted Catholics. In 1998, Protestants and Catholics signed a peace accord known as the Good Friday Agreement. War ravages Chechnya, the Russian-Chechen Wars. So here's a look at the area that we're talking about on a map. If you look at Russia, right here along the Caspian Sea, you've got Dagestan, and down here below is Chechnya, right next to Ingushetia. And you can see that on this map. So here's Georgia along the Black Sea, and this is Chechnya in here, so just north of Georgia. Now, a little bit of background is that prior to the Russian-Chechen Wars, the former Soviet Union collapsed. Several republics became independent, including Georgia. But Chechnya declared their independence, and it was not recognized by Russia. So now this area, as you can see here, you see the Caucasus Mountains. That's really where Dagestan and Chechnya, they're located right here along the Caucasus mountain ranges. There's another look at the photograph from the Caucasus Mountains. And so it's in this region where Russia had conquered non-Russian peoples. And so a little bit of background on Chechnya. Chechnya has been recognized as a distinct people since the 17th century. In other words, going all the way back into the 17th century or the 1600s. Since that time, the people of Chechnya have been recognized as a distinct people group, the Chechens. Chechens were active opponents of the Russian conquest of the Caucasus during the period of 1818 to 1917. So this really corresponds to really pretty much the last 100 years of the Tsarist Russia or Imperial Russia. prior to, of course, the Russian Revolution that took place during World War I. Russia defeated their leader in 1858, ending their hope of a separate Islamic state. So the people of Chechnya, by religion, are predominantly Muslim. And so, and they are a distinct people group, different, of course, than Russians. So they're conquered by the Russian Tsar. They declared their independence after the Russian Revolution in 1917, which led to the Bolshevik occupation. So, keep in mind that, they had been conquered, and, really, they had been fighting a battle going back to 1818. Eventually, 40 years later, they're conquered. They become a people that are dominated by, by the Russian governments. That's the way things remain. So when the Russian Revolution breaks out in 1917, they sense this as an opportunity to break free of Russian domination. But the new Bolshevik government that comes to power under Vladimir Lenin doesn't want to give up control. And so, they maintain their possession. Then, as we move forward in the 20th century, we move into the midst of World War II. Stalin believed that Chechens would welcome Nazi Germany in return for an independent Chechnya. So, this leads to the mass deportation of Chechen people, among others. It is estimated to be in the range of somewhere between 400 and 800,000, with perhaps 100,000 or more of these people dying due to the extreme conditions. And so, quite literally, the Chechens were forced from their homeland during this time by the rule of Joseph Stalin. And the reason why was, once again, he's fearful that in the midst of World War II, they're going to ally themselves with Nazi Germany, hoping that they can become independent. With the death of Stalin in 1953, the deportees were returned in 1956. So finally, after about 15 years, they're able to return to their homeland. And the Republic was reestablished in 1957. This legacy helps to explain why Chechen nationalism has been more radical and anti-Russian than that of Russia's other Muslim ethnic minorities. With the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, a number of regions managed to break away and gain independence. Among those you have areas such as Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and several others. So they broke away and became independent. Ingushetia voted for separation from Chechnya in a referendum and became an autonomous republic, basically meaning that they became a republic, had a republic form of government, and they had autonomy, basically, or self-rule for the most part. General Zokhar Dudayev, seizing power in the capital of Grozny in 1991, led Chechnya's drive for independence. The president of the newly formed Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, refused Chechnya's declaration of independence, sending in troops instead, only to withdraw when confronted by armed Chechens. Russia never accepted Chechnya as a separate republic and was determined not to encourage other areas to secede. The resulting anarchy in Chechnya strengthened the Russian belief that the region should not become independent and undermine its territorial integrity. Furthermore, oil is a significant factor in this region. In other words, when you look at where Russia has their oil reserves, a significant portion of their oil reserves do come from this region. Another reason why Russia doesn't want to let this area go. So this brings us now to the First War. Tensions between the Russian government and that of Chechen President Dzhokhar Dudayev escalated into warfare in late 1994. When Russia invaded Chechnya, a bloody war ensued, intending to crush separatist forces. This was Yeltsin's first major confrontation. Grozny was devastated. 70,000 to 80,000 people died, mostly Chechen civilians. Now, to put that into some kind of a perspective, if you look at the city of Oakdale, the population is only about 20,000. So, we're talking about, between 3 and 4 times the population of Oakdale that was lost as a result of the devastation of the capital of Grozny. And also to put that into a perspective, if you look at the city of Modesto, which has a population of right around 200,000, 70 to 80,000 would be a very significant chunk of that population. Finally, though, in 1996, Russia withdrew defeated. The aftermath of the First War. The aftermath of the 1994 to 1996 war further eroded the Chechen government's control over the militias. While local warlords gained strength, the destroyed Chechen economy left armed but unemployed Chechens. Brutalized by war and atrocities committed by Russian troops, they were easily radicalized. The Soviet-Afghan War had attracted Islamic militants as well as resistance fighters to Chechnya and neighboring Dagestan, emboldened because the area was free of the Russian military. Dudayev was killed in a 1995 Russian rocket attack and was replaced by Aslan Mashkadov, elected in 1997. At the beginning of 1999, Mashkadov declared Islamic Sharia law to be phased in over the next 3 years. Some former rebel commanders announced a rival body to govern Chechnya, also based on Sharia law, calling on Mashkadov to resign, hinting at internal conflicts. So, now there's this sense that you've got 2 different Islamic groups, in effect, both kind of vying for the leadership of Chechnya. Around mid-1999, Moscow accused the Chechen leadership of supporting extremist Islamic militants in Dagestan. While denied by the government, local warlords, mostly independent of the central government, did support militant Islamic groups there. Former members of the Chechen Republican legislature established a Moscow-based state council of the Republic of Chechnya, affording Moscow a reason to recognize it as the sole legitimate Chechen authority and to refuse negotiation with Mashkadov. In this manner, war could then be legitimized if needed. The Second War. Moscow and other Russian cities suffered bomb blasts, killing more than 300 people. Chechens were blamed for the attacks, though it was never proven. In response, the response by the new Russian president, Vladimir Putin, was brutal. Some analysts believe that Putin had calculated this response would help his 2000 election. The Second War. Russia's full-scale war with Chechnya led to many bombing raids by Russian forces. Some one-third to one-half of the 1.3 million Chechen people are said to have fled from Chechnya. Slowly, Grozny and other parts of Chechnya were being pounded and destroyed while the civilian population were caught in the middle of the conflict. Civilian casualties were high, and there was an international outcry at the brutal Russian crackdown and indiscriminate bombing and targeting of civilians. And the photographs here you see are of a rebuilt Grozny, the capital city. On April 20th, 2000, there was an offer of a ceasefire by the Chechen president Aslan Maskhadov. By June of 2000, there was more rebel fighting, suicide attacks, and increased guerrilla warfare by Chechen combatants, indicating that the conflict was far from over. Here you can see some photographs taken from the Russian-Chechen War. And of course you can see the devastation here. You see a Russian soldier in the streets, and look at the buildings in the background, just really bombed into rubble. Another photograph more or less showing the same thing. Now, this brings us to someone that I am acquainted with, named Dr. Hassan Bayev. And here you can see the image at the top, The Oath, A Surgeon Under Fire. That is the title of a book by Dr. Bayev. And here's a quote from him. He says, "I wrote The Oath for two reasons. I wanted the world to know that war is a hellish thing, which victimizes the innocent. In war, there are no winners. Second, and equally important, I wanted to introduce my readers to the Chechen people." So, here's a look at Dr. Hassan Bayev. Hassan Bayev, a surgeon and a Chechen hero, was born in Alkan-Kala, a suburb of the Chechen capital of Grozny, in 1963. Plagued by illness growing up, Bayev was propelled into athletics, in particular martial arts, to overcome his frailty. By the late 70s, he was a black belt champion judoka who won Russian competitions and faced a promising career as a coach in the sports-obsessed Soviet Union. During the First War, 1994 to 1996, Bayev treated thousands of civilians. He also operated on and saved a Chechen field commander in a secret underground hideout with the assistance of a Russian doctor the Chechen fighters had taken prisoner. When a Chechen field commander threatened to kill the Russian doctor in retaliation for the murder of his brother, Bayev helped him escape. Thrown into a pit for 9 days, where the relatives of the field commander tried to force a confession, Bayev barely escaped execution himself. During the Second War, 1999 to present, Arbi Barayev, a notorious Chechen thug, tried Bayev in a kangaroo court for treating Russian soldiers. Facing execution yet again, Bayev was saved at the last minute by the Russian bombardment of his town. The Russians, in turn, issued their own order for Bayev's arrest after he saved the life of Shamil Basayev, one of the Kremlin's most wanted field commanders. Quote, "With $1 million bounty on Shamil's head, I could have been a rich man if I had let him bleed to death," unquote, Bayev noted. Realizing that Bayev was a man wanted by both sides, Physicians for Human Rights helped him to seek political asylum in the United States. He reluctantly immigrated in 2000, telling the New York Times, quote, "Nobody likes to recall that I was saving elderly civilians by the thousands. The only thing they remember is that I was the surgeon who operated on Basayev," unquote. For the past 3 years, Dr. Bayev has become an outspoken advocate for human rights who has been honored by Human Rights Watch Physicians for Human Rights, and Amnesty International. He has even returned to competitive sports after a break of 13 years, and in 2001 and 2002, he won the World Championship in Sambo, a Russian form of martial arts. Quote, "If it weren't for my athletic training, I don't think I ever would have survived the two Russian-Chechen wars," unquote. Dr. Bayev lives today in Massachusetts with his wife and 6 children. His youngest child, a girl named Satsida, was born in 2003 in Boston. Quote, "She is our American daughter. All of my family here and in Chechnya are delighted, and maybe one day she will grow up to be a U.S. Senator," unquote. The reason I know Dr. Bayev is because I too have a background in the sport of Sambo. So I came into it from the sport of wrestling, but began to compete internationally. And this is a photograph here. Pictured here on the far left is Stephen Kepfer, who is the president of the American Sambo Association, based, and also is the head instructor at New York City Combat Sambo, based in Manhattan. Next to him is Dr. David Rudman, who was at one point the president of FIAS, the international governing body that sanctions Sambo. Here is Dr. Bayev, and to the right is myself. At the time, I was the United States Sambo Association president. And so this was taken in Orlando, Florida, at the World Open Sambo Championships, which Dr. Bayev won. And here we have the Moscow theater hostage crisis. So on October 23rd, 2002, about 50 Chechen rebels storm a Moscow theater, taking up to 700 people hostage during a sold-out performance of a popular musical. The musical was called Nordosk. And you can see pictured here, actually, is this is kind of the lead terrorist, who was actually the nephew of one of the most notorious field commanders who Dr. Bayev was acquainted with. He really grew up in the same hometown. In fact, in Dr. Bayev's book, he tells of the story where he was contacted indirectly by the Russian government, who was seeking his assistance in trying to negotiate the release of the hostages during this conflict. However, that was unsuccessful. So the second act of the musical Nordost was just beginning when an armed man walked on stage and fired a machine gun into the air. The terrorists, including a number of women with explosives strapped to their bodies, identified themselves as members of the Chechen army. They had one demand: that Russian military forces begin an immediate and complete withdrawal from Chechnya, the war-torn region located north of the Caucasus Mountains. And so, many of these women were widows who had lost their husbands in these Russian-Chechen wars. The brutality and the civilian casualties that had been experienced in Chechnya, especially in Grozny, had led to this radicalization. And there are also indications that there had been kind of what has been referred to as an Arabization of this conflict. While Chechens are not Arabs, they're not an Arab people, but because they are Muslim, the influence of some Arab Islamic fundamentalist groups was very obvious in this terrorist act, as even some of the writing, some of the signs that were held up were done in Arabic, which, once again, it would not be normal for the Chechen people. After a 57-hour standoff at the Palace of Culture, during which 2 hostages were killed, the Russian Special Forces surrounded and raided the theater on the morning of October 26th. Later, it was revealed that they had pumped a powerful narcotic gas into the building, knocking nearly all of the terrorists and hostages unconscious, before breaking into the walls and roof, entering through an underground sewage tunnels. Most of the guerrillas and 120 hostages were killed during the raid, including, sadly, some children. Another side note, just as I was teaching this unit last year, the Boston Marathon bombing took place, and we soon learned that the 2 terrorists that conducted the bombing were immigrants from Chechnya. And, it does appear that they had been radicalized, particularly the older brother, Tsarnaev, or was their name Tamaran Tsarnaev, I believe. I can't remember the exact first name, but the older brother of the 2, who ended up being killed, not captured. He had recently made a trip back home to his native Chechnya, and it was believed that he had been had fallen under the influence of some radicals, and actually had really come to be associated with radical Islam, or Islamic fundamentalism, and which is kind of perplexing, because most of the terrorist actions that we have seen carried out by Chechens have been targeted at Russia, or at the Russian government. But in this case, they targeted the United States, and allegedly the reason why they targeted the United States had to do with the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, which they were angry at the United States. And that, once again, ties very much back into the type of Islamic fundamentalism that we associate with Al-Qaeda. And that really kind of illustrates that radicalization that has occurred sometimes with some Chechens due to the Russian brutality. And Dr. Bayev, I'm sure, was upset by these actions, because that's not the Chechen people that he knows. Very sad situations. He has sought to draw attention to the brutality of the war, and really has sought to help Chechen children. And yet here you have an incident where you have some Chechens that really kind of carry out a horrific act, and really kind of tarnishes the image that much of the world has of the Chechen people, which is unfortunate. But I personally know Dr. Bayev and know him to be a very honorable person. Now, we begin to look at Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia breaks apart. Yugoslavia, before 1991, Yugoslavia was multi-ethnic, meaning it was made up of several ethnic groups. These groups included Serbs, Montenegrins, and Macedonians who were Orthodox Christians, Croats and Slovenes who were Roman Catholics, and the mostly Muslim Bosnians and Albanians. So, not only was Yugoslavia multi-ethnic, or made up of many different ethnic groups, but there were also different religions. Orthodox Christians, and that really goes back to the old split between Eastern and the Western Roman Empire. The Christian Church in the Eastern Empire, which became known as the Byzantine Empire, the primary faith there was the Orthodox faith, or the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christian Church. And then Roman Catholics, well, that was the Western Christian Church. You know, that's what existed in the other part of the Roman Empire. And then you've also, of course, got the Islamic faith. Yugoslavia was made up of 6 republics that were similar to states in the U.S. These were Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Republics break away. When communism fell, nationalist revolts broke out. Serbia tried to maintain control. Slovenia and Croatia were the first to declare independence in 1991, but fighting broke out between Croats and Serbs. Macedonia and Bosnia soon declared independence as well. By 1992, all that remained of Yugoslavia was Serbia and Montenegro. In 2003, it was renamed Serbia and Montenegro. Fighting between Serbs and Croats in Croatia spread to neighboring Bosnia when Bosnia declared independence in 1992. Bosnian Serbs fought to set up their own separate government in Bosnia. During the war, all sides committed atrocities. Serbs in Bosnia conducted a vicious campaign of what they called ethnic cleansing, or killing people from other ethnic groups. Now, really, when it comes right down to it, ethnic cleansing is really pretty much synonymous with the term genocide, which is a race murder. So, ethnic cleansing is really kind of the same thing. Killing people of other ethnic groups, very much a race murder. NATO involvement. Thousands of Bosnians and Croats were killed, sometimes in mass executions. Croatian and Bosnian fighters took revenge. Croats launched an ethnic cleansing campaign to drive Serbs from parts of Croatia. To many, ethnic cleansing recalled the horrors of the Holocaust during World War II. Finally, NATO airstrikes against the Bosnian Serb military forced the warring parties to negotiate. They signed the Dayton Accords, ending the war in 1995. The fight for Kosovo. As Bosnia reached a tense peace, a crisis broke out in the Serbian province of Kosovo. Ethnic Albanians made up 90% of the population in Kosovo. The rest of the population was mostly Serbian. In 1989, Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, an extreme Serbian nationalist, had begun oppressing Kosovar Albanians. The situation worsens. In the mid-1990s, a small guerrilla army of ethnic Albanians began to respond with armed attacks on Serbian targets. Milosevic rejected international peace efforts. In 1999, NATO launched airstrikes against Serbia. Serbian troops attempted ethnic cleansing of Albanian civilians. However, NATO airstrikes eventually forced the Serbian forces to withdraw from Kosovo. UN and NATO forces restored the peace. Milosevic trial. February 12, 2002, the trial of Milosevic on charges of genocide and war crimes in Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo began. Milosevic served as his own attorney for much of the prolonged trial, which ended without a verdict when the so-called butcher of the Balkans, was found dead at the age of 64 from an apparent heart attack in his prison cell on March 11, 2006. Conflicts in Africa since 1945. We'll start with the Battle of Mogadishu, more commonly referred to as Black Hawk Down. We talked about this in the last chapter, but this was fought on October 3rd and 4th, 1993 in Mogadishu, Somalia, between forces of the United States and Somali militia fighters that were loyal to the self-proclaimed president-to-be Mohammed Farah Aidid, who had support from armed civilian fighters. During the operation, 2 U.S. Black Hawk helicopters were shot down by rocket-propelled grenades, and 3 others were damaged Some of the wounded survivors were able to evacuate back to the compound, but others remained near the crash site and were isolated. An urban battle ensued throughout the night. 18 Americans were killed and their bodies were dragged through the streets. This event actually led to the United States withdrawing its forces from Somalia, and many people believe this is a reason why the United States did not react to future genocides. Many people believe it kind of created a reluctance to get involved in other conflicts in Africa. Now, we look at South Africa. European settlers dominated the political system. The process of gaining independence was complicated. In 1912, local blacks had organized the African National Congress, or ANC. And here's a look at South Africa. And this shows kind of the demographics over on the left. What you see is the country, if you look at the pie chart, is 75.2% black, 13.6% white, colored of mixed race, 8.6%, and Asian or Indian, 2.6%. Now, we're going to look really at the issue of apartheid. Afrikaners, South African whites, pushed for strict segregation of races, known as apartheid. The blacks demonstrated against the apartheid laws. And here you can see a photo from some of the protests on the bottom right. And the picture on the left, you can see police actually attacking and violently beating protesters. Here is a sign from South Africa. You can read here, "For use by white persons. These public premises and the amenities thereof have been reserved for the exclusive use of white persons by order of Provincial Secretary." And here's another one, City of Durban. Under Section 37 of the Durban Beach Bylaws, this bathing area is reserved for the sole use of members of the white race. This brings us here to Nelson Mandela. He was the leader of the African National Congress, or the ANC. ANC members called for armed resistance to the white government. Mandela was imprisoned in 1962. Divestment refers to the use of a concerted economic boycott with specific emphasis on liquidating stock to pressure a government, industry, or company towards a change in policy. And this is something that many people began to seek with regards to South Africa, to put pressure on the South African government to end apartheid. Some Americans began pushing for the U.S. government to pursue a policy of divestment in South Africa. And here we have Bishop Desmond Tutu. Bishop Desmond Tutu has been active in the defense of human rights and uses his high profile to campaign for the oppressed. Tutu received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984. He also lobbied for the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. Then, South Africa elected Frederick William de Klerk, or F.W. de Klerk. So he becomes the president of South Africa, and he lifted the ban on the ANC and freed Nelson Mandela. And we see him here shaking hands with Nelson Mandela. Then, shortly after obtaining his release, after more than 30 years in prison, Mandela becomes president. Nelson Mandela was elected president in 1994 and won the first multiracial election in South Africa. He served as president from 1994 to 1999. Here you can see him pictured alongside then U.S. President Bill Clinton. Oh, and of course, apartheid now has finally ended in South Africa. Now here we have a look at Rwanda and Burundi. So in this area, Hutus were the dominant ethnic group in Rwanda, and the Tutsi people dominated in Burundi. Hutus began to kill thousands of Tutsis in Rwanda, and the Tutsis fled. A civil war broke out, killing about 500,000. When Tutsis gained control, the Hutus fled to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Tutsis invaded to put down Hutu militias, resulting in the death of about 3.5 million due to the war. Here's a Hutu propaganda poster. And on the left, you see a refugee camp, and then skulls and bones of the Rwanda victims on the right. This genocide caused a stunning loss of life in a very short period of time, and the international community really refused to react as this was taking place. This is the setting or the backdrop for the movie Hotel Rwanda, starring Don Cheadle, where he kind of depicts this conflict. Now we move to something that's even more recent, the Sudan. In Sudan, Muslims from the northern Sudan dominated the government. Policies discriminated against non-Muslims. Islamic law was imposed even in non-Muslim areas. Rebel groups fought against the northern domination. And this is a map you can see over here of the Sudan, and the capital is right here, Khartoum. And then you can look over here. This is really what we would consider the Darfur region along western Sudan, where it borders with neighboring Chad. So Darfur. Ethnic conflict in Sudan spread to the western region of Darfur. The Janjaweed, an Arab militia backed by the government, unleashed a terror campaign against the non-Muslims in Darfur. Genocide has been the results. There are some more pictures here, and as you look at this map, you can see areas of attacks by the Arab militias, mostly spread throughout Darfur. And here's another look at some of the Arab militias, once again backed by the Sudanese government. And here's a look at some of the refugee camps. As this has taken place, neighboring Chad hasn't really been able to handle all the refugees, and so many of the refugees live in pretty dire conditions, and there's been a lot of death even in the refugee camps. UN peacekeepers have been sent in, but they've had a hard time. They've been attacked and harassed sometimes by the Janjaweed as well. But for the most part, the international community hasn't made much of an effort to bring an end to this. Another conflict issue in Africa is the issue of conflict diamonds, also called a converted diamond, a blood diamond, hot diamond, or a war diamond. And this refers to a diamond that is mined in a war zone and sold to finance an insurgency, invading armies' war efforts, or a warlord's activity, usually in Africa, where around 2/3 of the world's diamonds are extracted. This did serve as the basis of a movie the movie with the title of Blood Diamonds, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. And one of the real true difficulties is it's very difficult to determine a diamond's origin and whether or not it possibly is really what would be considered a conflict-free diamond. Okay, now we're going to look at the Arab-Israeli conflict from 1948 to present. Okay, Israel. For decades, the Middle East has been the location of conflict. Modern Israel was created in 1948 on land that had belonged to Palestinian Arabs. As a result, there has been repeated war and violence. In several wars against Egypt and others, Israel gained more land. This is called the occupied territories. So a little bit of background. We'll start with Zionism. Since the first centuries CE, most Jews have lived outside of the land of Israel, although there has been a constant presence of Jews. The diaspora began in 586 BCE during the Babylonian occupation of Israel. In the 1890s, Theodor Herzl launched modern Zionism, or a movement to establish a homeland for Jews in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1917, Great Britain issued the Balfour Declaration in support of the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So in addition to Britain supporting a Jewish homeland in the Mandate of Palestine, after the Holocaust during World War II, there was widespread support for a Jewish homeland. And Britain withdrew from Palestine in 1948. That's when the mandate expired, and the Jews proclaimed the independent state of Israel. Immediately, Israel was attacked by many of its Arab neighbors, and pretty quickly won or defeated its neighbors, winning basically its right to exist. And here's a look at Israel in 1947 and Israel in 1949. And you can see where it borders with Egypt, with Jordan, with Syria, and Lebanon. Now, of course, the fact that the Jews came in and now have a homeland, this displaced many Palestinians, leading to the Palestinian diaspora. And this is kind of a look at some of the numbers and the countries that many of these people have ended up in. So this shows Palestinian people that are living outside of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And so you see here's Jordan, which really has the largest number of refugees, followed by Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the Americas, Egypt, other Gulf states, other Arab states, and other countries. 1956, the Suez Crisis. This was a military attack on Egypt by Britain, France, and Israel, beginning on the 29th of October, 1956. This followed Egypt's decision to nationalize the Suez Canal, which really belonged to Great Britain and was built by the British. And Egypt decided to nationalize the Suez Canal because Britain and the United States had withdrawn an offer to fund the building of the Aswan Dam. And the reason why we and the British had withdrawn that offer to fund the dam is because we felt that the Egyptian leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, was becoming too friendly with the Soviet Union. This picture here to the right depicts Nasser, this is Nasser right here, with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. And the whole incident nearly leads to a war between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, backing opposite sides in the conflict. Then, next we look at the Six-Day War in 1967. So following several border clashes between Israel and its Arab neighbors, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser expelled the United Nations Emergency Force, or the UNEF, from the Sinai Peninsula in May of 1967. The peacekeeping force had been stationed there since 1957, following a British, French, Israeli invasion of Egypt, which was launched during the Suez Crisis. Egypt amassed troops on the Israeli border and closed the Straits of Tiran to all ships flying Israeli flags or carrying strategic materials, receiving strong support from other Arab nations. Israel responded with a similar mobilization. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive attack on Egypt. The Arab countries denied planning to attack Israel and asserted that Israel's strike was an illegal act of aggression. Jordan, which had signed a mutual defense treaty with Egypt, then attacked. Now, of course, it's easy to figure out why they called this the Six-Day War. So obviously this war didn't last too long, only 6 days. But at the war's end, Israel had gained control of the Sinai Peninsula, which had belonged to Egypt, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The results of the war affect the geopolitics of the region still today. And so here you can see on the map that this green area here is the Sinai Peninsula, which, like I said, had belonged to Egypt. Now Israel occupies it. And here you have other territory. This is what's known as the West Bank. Here you have the Golan Heights, which had belonged to Syria. The West Bank had been controlled by Jordan. And then this is the Gaza Strip right here. The Yom Kippur War in October of 1973. The 1973 Arab-Israeli War, this was fought once again in October of 1973 between Israel and a coalition of Arab states backing Egypt and Syria. The war began with a joint surprise attack on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. This coincided with the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Egypt and Syria crossed ceasefire lines to enter the Israeli-held Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights, which had been captured and occupied since the 1967 Six-Day War. The conflict had all the elements of a severe international crisis, and it nearly led to a confrontation of the two superpowers, the USA and the USSR, who were supplying their allies in the war. The Camp David Accords, 1978. Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat met with Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and U.S. President Jimmy Carter at Camp David, a presidential retreat here in the United States. And they reached a historic peace agreement that led to the 1979 Israel-Egypt Peace Treaty and to Sadat and Begin sharing the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize. It also led to the 1981 assassination of Sadat by Islamic fundamentalists. Here's a picture of the men. So on the left here is the Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat. In the middle, then U.S. President Jimmy Carter, and on the right, then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. And here are the three men again shaking hands. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. The Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, pictured here, fought against the Israelis. In the occupied territories, Palestinians launched uprisings called intifadas. In addition, suicide bombers spread terror inside Israel. The Israelis responded with armed force, and Palestinian bitterness increased. Steps toward peace. Leaders, such as Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, pushed for peace. There were many stumbling blocks, however, such as disagreements over Jerusalem, a city sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. During the early 2000s, new steps towards peace offered some hope, but serious obstacles still remain. Here you see former President Bill Clinton trying to broker the peace. So here you have Yasser Arafat on the right meeting with Yitzhak Rabin. Lebanon. Lebanon is home to diverse ethnic and religious groups. The government depended on a delicate balance among Arab Christians, Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, and Druze. In 1975, Christian and Muslim militias battled each other, and both Israel and Syria invaded. By 1990, however, peace had been restored.